Constitutional law. 10th Amendment. All powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to the states. Congress may not compel, but may induce, state government action by attaching conditions on federal funding. 11th Amendment. Prohibits suit against a state or state agency unless state expressly waives 11th Amendment protections. Suit relates to federal law adopted under Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. The suit seeks only injunctive relief against a state or state official, or seeks money damages from a state official. Federal court case or controversy requirement. Actual dispute, ripe, not moot. This is really important. Federal courts are limited to deciding actual cases or controversies. They cannot give advisory opinions or address hypothetical disputes. A matter is ripe when there's an actual harm or immediate threat of harm. If the dispute has ended or resolved, it has become moot, and the court will not hear it unless the wrong is capable of being repeated and escaping review, such as Roe v. Wade. Defendant voluntarily stops the offending practice, but could resume at any time, or in a class action where at least one member of the class has an ongoing injury. Standing. For standing, the following must be shown. Individual. Actual injury caused by defendant which would be satisfied by a favorable decision. Redressable. Organizational. Can sue for its own injury or on behalf of members if member has standing. Interest related to organizational purpose and is not required to participate. State action. To violate the Constitution, there must be government involvement. By non-government party. May qualify as state action if acting on behalf of the government. Congressional regulation of commerce, the Commerce Clause. Congress regulates channels, instrumentalities, and people, and activities which have substantial effect on interstate commerce. Negative aspect of the Commerce Clause, Dormant Commerce Clause. There is no actual DCC. States must enact laws in good faith and fair dealing with other states. If they do not, the Commerce Clause would preempt state law, unless it can pass strict scrutiny. Restricts state from regulating activity affecting interstate commerce if discriminatory or unduly burdensome. Discriminatory, unconstitutional unless the burden is narrowly tailored to achieve a legitimate state objective, or the state is a market participant. Unduly burdensome, unconstitutional when the burden on the interstate commerce is clearly excessive to the benefits to the state. Exceptions, important. Market participant, not regulation, the state owns or operates a business. DCC does not apply. Congress allows it. Congress actually allows the regulation, normally in the law itself. Supremacy Clause, preemption. Conflict preemption. Federal law preempts conflicting state law. Field preemption. When federal government occupies the entire field, states cannot regulate in that field. Necessary and proper clause. Congress has the power to make all laws which are necessary and proper to accomplish its enumerated powers. Tax and spend clause. Congress may spend for any public purpose for the general welfare. Due process. Due process of law is not an exact science. It works on a case-by-case basis, so use the fact pattern and decide if due process was valid or not. Binds federal through 5th Amendment, states through 14th Amendment. Procedural due process, PDP. Government may not deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. At a minimum, notice and hearing. The fact pattern will give us a hint at what else should have been included. Life, obvious. Liberty, physical and intangible liberties, driving, raising a family, etc. Property, real and personal property, public education, government employment, licenses, and benefits one is already receiving. Must already have the job or benefit, not merely be applying for it. Levels of scrutiny. Strict scrutiny, plaintiff wins. Government must show compelling government interest and the law is necessary for achieving it. FAR applies to the issues of fundamental rights, alienage, and race. Fundamental, marriage, living with family, childbearing and rearing, domestic travel, voting, etc. Intermediate scrutiny. Government must show law is substantially related to important government interest. GI. Applies to gender and illegitimacy. Rational basis test. Plaintiff loses. Plaintiff must show the law is not rationally related to any legitimate purpose. AWE, or AW, applies to age, wealth, and economic classifications. Takings clause, Fifth Amendment. Private property may not be taken for public use without just compensation. Public use, rationally related to conceivable public purpose and benefit. Just compensation, market value at time of taking. Regulatory total taking if the regulation has interfered with the owner's reasonable investment-backed expectation for the parcel as a whole. Permanent, physical invasion or confiscation of property, or use restriction, denying all economic beneficial use. We have to discuss this one if it comes up. Substantive due process, SDP, rights subject to fundamental, marriage, living with family, childbearing and rearing, domestic travel, voting, etc. Strict scrutiny. Non-fundamental, social and economic regulations, rational basis. Equal Protection Clause, EPC. 14th Amendment prohibits the government from treating similarly situated people differently. Applicable to federal through 5th Amendment. On its face, actually in the statute or regulation, or as applied through administration of a statute. Levels of review for EPC. What the government must prove and ways to remember it. Strict, necessary for compelling government interest, necessarily compelling. Intermediate, substantially related to important government interest, substantially important. Rational basis, rationally related to legitimate government interest, rationally legitimate. Classification scheme, level of review required. We need to understand this generally. Suspect, race, national origin, state alienage, strict. Quasi-suspect, gender and illegitimacy, intermediate. Non-suspect, social, economic, rational basis. Freedom of speech. Content-based, forbids the communicative impact of the expression. Strict scrutiny, regulations must meet narrowly tailored strict scrutiny necessary to achieve a compelling government interest. Content neutral, forbids other than the communicative impact of expression. Allowed if regulations serve a substantial government interest and are narrowly tailored, leaving open alternative channels of communication. Time, place, manner restrictions, TPM. Must be content and viewpoint neutral to meet intermediate scrutiny. Public and designated public forums. Must serve significant government interest, be narrowly tailored, and leave open alternative channels of communication. Schools who open up meeting space for clubs and such. Non-public forums. Closed to the public. Must be viewpoint neutral, serve legitimate government interest, and be reasonably related. These are like airport secure areas and such. Commercial speech. Must serve a substantial government interest, directly advance that interest, and be narrowly tailored to reasonably fit. Limitations on free speech regulations. Vagueness. Reasonable person would have to guess at meaning. Overbreath. Banning both protected and unprotected speech. Unfettered discretion. Lacking defined standards for the denial of a permit. Prior restraints of free speech. Must show serious irreparable harm to the public will occur. Must have narrowly tailored standards and a final determination on injunction to be valid. Freedom of religion. First Amendment, applicable to the states via the 14th Amendment. Free exercise clause. Bars any law which burdens the free exercise of religion. Exception. Law of general applicability which does not intentionally burden religious beliefs and advances important public interests. Establishment clause. Government may not endorse or favor any specific religion. Incidentally favoring. Allowable in an attempt to benefit wide variety of people. Sect preference. Government must meet narrowly tailored strict scrutiny to achieve a compelling government interest. No sect preference. Lemon test. Have secular purpose, secular effect, and does not foster government entanglement with religion. Note on the lemon test. You don't need to say lemon test. Just know how to discuss secular purpose, effect, and no government entanglement. These are the lemon test.